I'm attempting to. Okay, that is one hell of a locomotive. My finger's in front of the lens. There we go.
Well, if it isn't Dale.
Ah!
Hey Dan!
Ho, ho, ho!
I like the Santa hat. Eureka and Palisade number 4.
Yes.
Dan's locomotive. Heading to the Railroad Museum in Boulder
Uh-huh.
for the Christmas train.
That's a Santa train.
The Santa train.
No.
And here's
What is
Santa.
he doing?
We're live
Hi.
on Facebook. I've never done live on Facebook before.
Fake book?
Yeah. Or not Facebook, this is
This is
YouTube.
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 We did go
no,
live
we're
on
doing
Facebook
live.
at one time. It's moving.
YouTube has a live deal too?
Yeah, it's a new thing. It's sort of in beta, sort of not in beta. This is Adam.
What's happening, boys?
He's a locomotive, not a locomotive, he's a train conductor, which is different than a symphony conductor.
Not really.
Similar idea.
Different than a conductor of electricity.
Yes. This is called how you jockey a really big locomotive around on a cul-de-sac.
This is backyard railroading.
That's just backyard railroading. And if I don't step back, I'm going to become part of the track.
Now you become part of the pavement.
And here's how we film the show.
Yeah, from a cell phone.
From a cell phone.
Yes.
Sometimes we use a camera, but quite often we use what we got.
Yes.
We use what we got. The next thing to do will be to load the tender. These guys are talking about just heading right straight to Boulder now that they're loaded. In Nevada, it's okay to drive if you're loaded. Typically, that's frowned upon. And this is called distracted driving. Taking an 1870s locomotive, sticking it on a trailer and driving around with it. That's about as distracted as you can get. Trying to catch up with the locomotive that's leaving us. Some lovely history to this engine, which will be on the Sunday show when we put the Sunday show up on this. But this was burned up in a casino fire, and Dan just bought it while having dinner and at Tony Roma's, and it just occurred to him he should buy this burned up locomotive and take it home and fix it, which is exactly what he did. And it's been down for a while as its boiler certifications were up, and it is now recertified and ready to be screwed around with. So it's headed for the Santa train at the museum in Boulder, Boulder City, and we'll be heading out there following the train as it goes. You may recognize this rig as it's been modeled extensively, and you can buy the Bachmann Spectrum model of this locomotive, which is reasonably correct. The pilot is wrong, but the new versions of this locomotive have the pilot, and if you call back Bachmann, and if you ask very politely, they will sell you the proper pilot for your Eureka and Palisade number 4, so you can get the correct metal pilot as opposed to the wood pilot. Here we have the rig, the trailer that the tender will soon be mounted upon. Historically, Dan used to rent all this gear to move this, but subsequently, because laying track on a trailer is a little bit time consuming, and having these ramps just hinged and in place is so much more convenient, well, he just bought the rig so that he can move this more easily. The real fun is, of course, to take this to either Chama or Durango. It's been on both railroads numerous times, and not just take it down the road to Boulder City for the Christmas train, the Santa train, but instead to haul it all the way to Colorado and run it there. Dan and I have taken this thing around to various locations, and I will be putting up as part of the show some footage that I recently rescued of the very first outings. The very first outing of the locomotive was in 1991 when it was taken to rail fair in Sacramento. The engine had been finished for about 14 minutes before it was loaded. Then they hauled it under a low bridge and kind of well, they damaged the engine. They knocked the whole stack off. So when they got to Sacramento, quick repairs were done. Subsequently, wanted to run it on some real track, and surprisingly, there's a 3-foot gauge railroad in Plaster City, California. That's just a regular freight railroad. Got permission to go run on that. Try filling one of these things from a garden hose. That didn't work out. But bit by bit, we solved all of our different problems and ran this on the Plaster City. And I found that footage, and it's in good shape in spite of its age. And I'll be putting that up with the show on this when I get that put together. But the next outing was to take it to Durango Silverton. A well photographed and well documented run. Then we hauled it back to Durango Silverton, and there's a show up on that when we hauled it there for filming of The West, directed by Steve Ives and produced by what's his name, the famous director turned producer for that that made the Civil War, Ken Burns. Geez, brain fart. At any rate, it gets around. Dan hauls it around a lot, and it isn't all that hard, surprisingly, to move this thing. Just throw it on a trailer and go. Well, you throw it on 2 trailers and go. Now, what we used to do as well, and I'm not sure what the plan is today because it really isn't necessary, but just because you've hauled this thing to Colorado doesn't mean that there's some forest standing by that you can cut down and burn in it, as it's a wood burner. You can't run the coal in it that they have there. So historically, what we've done is once the tender is loaded onto a trailer, that leaves plenty of room on that trailer, and there's a big wooden box that goes on there to hold about 2 cords of wood. But that won't be necessary because the wood's I think the wood's already out at Boulder, all set to go. Also out at Boulder, Dan is building a passenger car, and he's already built a 1870 vintage flat car, which he will be hauling on this train. Was hoping that the passenger car, the Combine, would be ready for this particular trip. But that particular Tuesday has not popped up just yet. Dan said that the passenger car will be finished on Tuesday, just not which Tuesday, and that Tuesday is not this Tuesday. So that sucker's still, 6 months, I don't know, 8 months out, and then the Combine will be towed around with this puppy. But what an absolutely beautiful locomotive. He's done such a fabulous job restoring this. It's a wee bit dusty as it's been parked for some time, awaiting its boiler inspections and retubing as required by federal law. But she's all back together. Just needs a bit of a wash job here. I'm sure Santa Claus would be willing to pitch in and help with that. And we'll be riding the Santa Claus train. It's going to be running for the next 3 weekends there at the museum in Boulder. If you're in the area, you might want to pop out to the Nevada State Railroad Museum Boulder. Of course, they've got several iterations of the Nevada State Railroad Museum. And ride the Christmas train, because here it is. This wood was a score. Dan found a local gunsmith who'd over-purchased walnut, and historically this always had a walnut cab, and you start looking for 3-inch thick walnut and you're going to pay a lot of money, and it's hard to find. But there in the gun shop was all the walnut he could ever use at an incredibly good price. This is interesting. That little disc right there was for passenger trains. When they were hauling passengers, a brass bell was mounted right there, and a cord tied to that bell that ran through the whole train, the emergency cord. So if anybody spotted an emergency that would require stopping the train, they'd yank that cord and it would ring the bell that would be mounted to that disc right there, alerting the train crew to stop the train. Pretty darn handsome locomotive. Well, I'm going to cut this off now and start shooting some other video for the show. This will be the show on one of these first Sundays. Let's see, next Sunday is a 7.5-inch gauge railroad, and the Sunday after that we're back working on the railroad at Garage Mahal, and this will probably be the Sunday after that. So how cool is that? Having never gone live before, now I have to figure out how to ungo live. But how nifty is this? Okay, now I just have to figure out how to stop. Okay, here we go.